Imagine this, a decision made in the heat of the 2008 financial crisis. A move designed to save the entire U.S. economy ends up sparking a decade-long legal war. A war over presidential power and hundreds of billions of dollars, pitting private investors against the U.S. government and going all the way to the Supreme Court. That's exactly what happened here. All right, so here's how we're going to break down this incredible story. First, we'll go back to the crisis that started this whole mess. Then we'll get into the controversial deal at the heart of the dispute. From there, we'll follow the shareholders' two big legal challenges all the way up the ladder. And you're definitely going to want to stick around for the final twist, a really surprising ending that makes you question what it even means to win. To really wrap your head around this case, we have to jump in a time machine and go back to the sheer chaos of 2008. The housing market was in an absolute freefall, and a couple of key companies were right at the epicenter of the earthquake. Those companies were Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I mean, these were the giants of the American mortgage market. In 2007, they were holding or guaranteeing a staggering $5 trillion in mortgages. As the bubble burst, they were hemorrhaging money, so much so that their failure could have dragged the entire national economy down with them. So the government knew it had to do something, and fast. In the summer of '08, Congress created a brand new, very powerful agency called the Federal Housing Finance Agency, the FHFA. By September, the FHFA had swooped in, taken full control of Fannie and Freddie, and the Treasury Department pumped in a massive amount of cash to keep them afloat. Now, the legal tool they used for this takeover is called a conservatorship. What is that? Well, think of it like this. The government basically becomes a temporary guardian. It steps in to manage these giant companies, keep them on life support, with the hope of eventually nursing them back to health. And for about 4 years, this whole setup seemed to be working, stabilizing things. But then, in 2012, the government changed the rules of the game. And it was this one move that would spark the entire legal firestorm we're talking about today. By 2012, Fannie and Freddie were stuck in this really weird, totally unsustainable loop. See, they didn't actually have enough cash on hand to pay the government the required dividends. So what do? They had to borrow more money from the Treasury just so they could immediately turn around and hand that same money back to the Treasury as a payment. It was absurd. So, to stop this crazy cycle, the government created something called the Third Amendment. The New Deal was simple. Forget the 10% dividend. Instead, the companies had to hand over 100% of their profits, all of it, to the Treasury every single quarter. This move became infamous as the net worth sweep. And the timing on this was just incredible. Right as Fannie and Freddie finally turned a corner and started making a ton of money again, the sweep kicked in. All that profit, we're talking about $200 billion in just a few years, was immediately swept away to the U.S. Treasury. That left nothing for the companies to rebuild their own funds and nothing for their private shareholders. You can imagine how the private shareholders felt about this. They just watched billions and billions in potential profits get vacuumed up by the government. So what did they do? They sued. They took the U.S. government to court, claiming that this whole net worth sweep was totally illegal. Their lawsuit basically had a two-pronged attack. First, they made a statutory claim. They argued that the FHFA just didn't have the legal power under the law to take all the profits. And second, they made a much bigger constitutional claim that the way the FHFA was set up was itself illegal and violated the Constitution. Okay, let's tackle that first argument. The shareholders said, look, the FHFA's job is to rehabilitate these companies, to get them back on their feet, not to bleed them dry. The question for the court was pretty straightforward. Did the agency go too far? So what did the Supreme Court say? Well, on this point, they sided with the government. They basically found that the law that created the FHFA gave it incredibly broad powers. And here's the key part. The law said the agency could act in the best interest of itself and the public, not just the company. So the court said, yeah, protecting taxpayers and keeping the market stable was a reasonable goal. The sweep was legal. Okay, so round one goes to the government. With that first claim shot down, the shareholders' entire case hinged on their second, much more explosive argument. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about whether this powerful government agency was fundamentally unconstitutional. This claim really gets to the core of how our government is supposed to work. The whole idea of the Constitution is to separate powers, to create checks and balances. The president is the head of the executive branch, which means they're supposed to have control over the agencies carrying out the law. The shareholders argue the FHFA was designed to escape that control. And here's the crucial detail, the thing this whole constitutional fight hinged on. The FHFA is run by one person, a director. But unlike, say, a cabinet secretary, the president can't just fire this director because they disagree on something. The law says the president can only remove them for cause, like for doing something illegal. This basically insulates the director from direct presidential oversight. And on this point, the Supreme Court agreed with the shareholders. Citing a similar recent case, the court ruled that having a single powerful agency head who's protected from being fired by the president, that violates the separation of powers. It puts way too much executive power in the hands of one unelected official. So they struck down that for-cause rule. It was unconstitutional. So this is a huge deal, right? The shareholders won. They successfully argued that the agency that took their money was unconstitutionally structured. So that means they get their billions back, right? Well, this is where the story takes its final, very unexpected turn. This was the multi-billion-dollar question left for the court. The shareholders won the big constitutional argument, but what's the actual fix for the harm they suffered? What's the remedy? And the court's stunning answer, in a nutshell, was no. Just because the structure was unconstitutional didn't mean the net worth sweep was automatically undone. Okay, so why not? This gets a little into the legal weeds, but stick with me. First, the court pointed out that the sweep was actually started by an acting director, someone the president could have fired anytime. For the later directors who were protected, the shareholders had to prove something almost impossible. They had to prove that a president would have fired them and stopped the sweep if only that unconstitutional rule hadn't been in the way. And since they couldn't prove what a president might have done in a hypothetical situation, their claim for damages failed. So in the end, the court fixed the constitutional problem for the future by giving the president more power. But it left the shareholders with a victory that probably felt pretty hollow. It leaves us all with this fascinating, really difficult question. When a part of the government is found to be flawed, how do you fix a harm that's already been done? How do you unwind the past? It's a question the courts are going to be wrestling with for a long, long time.